one individual at that time that influenced me a lot, mainly because of his organization, was Leonard Read. Because he made an effort to keep material together. He understood the power of ideas. And although I can't remember exactly where I came across Hayek's book, The Road to Serfdom, I do remember not too long after that being associated and being able to get books from the Foundation for Economic Education, and getting books as simple as it may seem, The Law by Bastiat. That is not complex. Our views aren't all that complex. You don't have to be able to memorize and recite every principle in human action. You know, if we all understood the principles in the law, it would be a real boost in understanding what's going on. But that just leads to studying even more. A revolution, a true revolution, is a philosophic revolution. It can end up in violence, and it can end up changing that way. But of course, ultimately, the only changes that can occur in a revolution, I believe, is a philosophic revolution. Now, the founders ended up in a combination. They understood history, Roman history, Old Testament history, and economic history. So they had a good foundation. They were never handicapped by the public school ed system, and they got their education elsewhere. And some of them were all homeschooled. Can you believe being homeschooled and ended up with a good education? So they were able to put together. They had strong beliefs, and they were willing to put it on the line. And it ended up there with violence involved. I'm sort of shy when it comes to violence. I like to do it a different way, and I think a lot can be accomplished. So this is the reason why I think it's so important to talk to groups like this. I know I'm in the business of politics, and politics are very important, but it reminds me about what Mises said about this. He said that people who write and study sound economic theories are very, very important. And people who write it and teach it. But he said there's also has to be another group of people who make these more complicated ideas palatable or understandable and endorsed by the average person. And I think that's what so many of us are involved in, trying to get people to understand these issues and to at least translate those eventually into policies. So it's great to be theoretical, but if it doesn't end up with good policy, we don't have a whole lot of success. But I think we've made tremendous strides. As I say, the strides that we make seem to be always surprising me on the upside. But I would say that if we look at the issue of the monetary system, the attention that we've been able to achieve in getting people to look at the unsoundness of the Federal Reserve System, I would say that we're having some real success. And it emphasizes both the ideas of the importance of a flawed monetary system, but it also emphasizes how the system works. If politicians were able to take care of this, and that was my responsibility to go to Washington, join the political class, and become speaker or committee chairman, and then force my views on others and think that this could have gone through, get the same attention, it would be absolutely impossible. We end up we have today 313 individuals who say that we ought to know more about the Fed. That is a minor step because it has nothing to do with monetary policy. We're not dealing with that. That will come. But how did that occur? It didn't occur because of my persuasive abilities in Washington or some speech that I gave on the House floor or me knocking on other members' doors and saying, hey, take a look at this. I want to tell you why this is important. It didn't happen that way. It happened from the grassroots. It happened from people being aroused and sending a lot of messages. Members of Congress, on average, are not philosophically driven. Sometimes they think they are, but they really aren't. And they're driven by one thing, and that is, how do I get reelected? That is what is the driving force. And in this instance, it became very well known that the issue of more transparency of the Federal Reserve was an issue that, if you wanted to be on the right side of that issue, better support it. So which groups supported this? Was it mainly a conservative movement? No way. Conservatives, liberals, libertarians, progressives, anarchists, everybody. They supported it because it became apparent, especially because of the economic crisis, that we have an obligation to try to find out more about an institution that just may well have had a lot to do with the crisis that we had. So the real achievement isn't getting the 313 signatures on there as much as the attention being directed in the right way toward Washington, D.C., not only Washington, D.C., but at the Federal Reserve System as well. This allows us an opportunity because eventually a new policy will have to be designed. I wrote the bill particularly to make sure it wasn't taking over monetary policy. You say, well, why didn't you do that? Why didn't you say get rid of the Fed and have commodity money and competing currencies or something like that? Because I wanted to make the point, the first step, and quite frankly, I think if we had a true audit, there would be another step because it would be very obvious, what they have been doing. But the Bernanke crowd and the rest are getting nearly hysterical over this whole thing. First thing they did was, I knew they were in trouble is when they hired a lobbyist. But you say, well, how did they pay that lobbyist? Did the Congress appropriate the money? Yeah, sure. I think they have that little thing they can take care of their own bills their own way. So they hire a lobbyist. And they figured they had the right lobbyist because they got the lobbyist that was involved in lobbying for Enron. And they've now recently started doing some so-called public service announcement for TV for movie theaters, and they're going to be shown in the movie theaters. So that means they're on the defensive. And this past week, Bernanke was on the defensive as well. My guess is Bernanke's probably going to get reappointed. I don't think there's enough momentum. Some people have criticized me for not being much more critical and come down and say, get rid of Bernanke, get rid of Bernanke. He's the cause of everything. Yeah, are you going to let Greenspan off the hook? There was a lot of mischief with Greenspan, and he was in there for a long time. Now, when they ask me about that, I say, no, I wouldn't vote for him, but there's nobody I would vote for anyway. It isn't the manager, it's the principle of them pretending that they know how to manage. They don't have any knowledge about what the money supply should be or what the interest rate should be. But I'll tell you what they do enjoy, and that is secrecy. They call that independence, but I call it secrecy. And they get particularly annoyed because I emphasize that I want to know what they're doing with international agreements. They can make an international agreement with another government and another central bank and international financial organizations. Well, that's treaty making. Well, where do they pay? How do they pay for this? They just extend loans or give them money. Who knows what they have been doing? I argue the case that there's two major secret organizations in Washington that are very, very dangerous to our liberty, dangerous to constitutional law and the rest. And that is the secrecy of the Fed and the secrecy of the CIA.